Good afternoon. Welcome to the Week in Review, Sunday afternoon, 5 o'clock. And I've got one of my guests in the studio already, Theo Venter from Northwest University's Potchefstroom Business School. And two more, Stephen Friedman of UJ and Jan Joubert, journalist. We're waiting to get them lined up. And our producer, Mornay Everson, busy sorting that one out. But in the meantime, the ANC heads into their NEC meeting this evening, and with everyone wondering, will they or won't they get Ace Magashule to step aside, that is. And it'll be a critical test for President Ramaphosa, I believe. But already there are rumors of war and wars that are being talked about, factions in the party itself. And with some of the unlikeliest people seeming to be coming out in support of the president. Theo Venter, looking at that, do you think this is going to... we're right in saying that this is a critical meeting for President Ramaphosa and for his future as president?
I don't think I agree with that analysis. If I looked at the newspapers from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, it's as if the newspapers are kind of preparing us for high noon at the OK Corral. Even one of the headings were playing on that theme. I think that is overstressing what can happen and what should happen in this NEC that starts tonight. Firstly, I don't think somebody like Ace Magashule will be fired, not even close. Secondly, I think the ANC, their typical way of dealing with these issues is to allow for a certain development and then over time re-look their own decisions, make sure that they can actually implement, because there was a lot of voices in August when they started with the stepping aside issue that said, well, it's unconstitutional. The ANC constitution doesn't provide for it, and the national constitution also is at loggerheads with this decision, because it's stepping aside, kind of putting you in a bin for a while, in a corner, and then you can come out. Or is it suspension? Or is it a soft suspension? What is it? And because some political parties, and I think specifically about the DA, they have a clause like that. If you bring the party in disrepute, you can be suspended, which I think is good, because if I only take the example of Mr. John Block, for how long did we follow that case in Kimberley where Mr. Block was actually acting MEC, well, he was MEC for Economic Affairs or Finance, I'm not exactly sure. He was the leader of the party, and he was clearly out on bail of 100,000 Rand. Now that bail tells you a story of the case in front of the court. So yes, I think it's very important for a political party to have a clause like that to prevent the members of the party, especially elected members, not to bring the party's name in disrepute. So one of the legal cases that the ANC will be discussed would be, is that the legal situation? The other one is that the ANC is fairly silent about these kind of issues, and they rely on the national constitution for what is right and what is wrong. And if the party can't act, you run to the courts and eventually the constitutional court. So they will debate this to and fro, and it will take a long time. Personally, I think what will come out of the discussions would be clarity in the ANC whether they have to change their own constitution to allow for these kind of situations. And if they have to do that, then remember the NEC can propose a change. The National General Council, which will sit somewhere in 2021, will evaluate, will look, will make a recommendation, and this will only be accepted in 2022 at the Leadership Conference or the National Conference, which will take place in December of 2022. So my point is, there's a lot of writing about what is going to happen this weekend. I do not expect anybody to be fired. I do expect the ANC to have clarity about how they can implement this stepping aside clause and if it's implementable at all, but it will be a vote. And that I think is important. My understanding and my view is that Ramaphosa will come out of this meeting, and for me, I would look who is going to make the announcement after the two-day conference. Is it going to be the Secretary General, or is it going to be Cyril Ramaphosa? He did that in 2 occasions in the last few months where he made the announcement. If he steps out and he makes the announcement, then we must know there was a fight and he came out on top. And I would be very, that would be the signals we would be looking for.
Well, that certainly, Jan Joubert, is what everybody, and welcome, by the way, I'm glad you could join us. It's certainly what ordinary members of the public, everybody's looking for, that to see, is the president indeed on top? Because we've had so many rumors and stories about the president being on a wobbly basis, and that he's being gunned for by Ace Magashule and a lot of other people who sit in the other camp and in the so-called Zuma faction as well. That you can't blame members of the public, the potential voters, to be rather nervous at the moment and wondering exactly where are we heading.
Yes, well, of course, none of us can see the future. Good afternoon to you from a swelteringly hot Paarl in the Western Cape. And I'm not even talking about the by-elections coming up on Wednesday. That's going to be sweltering hot. But as far as the ANC goes, none of us can see the future. And the situation is that I think there's something that is not reported. And that's something which is not reported is the answer to a question people ask in a rhetorical way while it is actually an actual question. Why would people not want Ace Magashule to leave his position as Secretary General of the ANC? And I just want to list 3 successes, massive successes, which he has had in that position of Secretary General of the ANC. The first is that under his watch, or on his watch, the ANC has reached the highest membership figures it has ever known, 1.4 million, or so it says. Given who the Secretary General is, and given the whole idea of the fox and the hen house, I hope that these figures are well audited. But that said, those are the figures that we have. Secondly, the type of provincial fights and disagreements that we have become used to under his predecessors as Secretary General, they have largely ceased. The ANC is a more well-organized organization than it used to be, and he must take credit, because were it not, he would have had to do the answering for it. And thirdly, one does not get the feeling that from the Thuli House you have the type of leaks which you saw under his predecessors, and that shows a tight ship. So I just wanted to make those points regarding Mr. Magashule. As far as the legal situation goes, I'm in agreement with what Theo said, which is basically that I think Mr. Ramaphosa overplayed his hand when he had this whole stepping aside idea. The South African law says you are not guilty until proven guilty. I don't believe it says that you're innocent until proven guilty, but you are not guilty until proven guilty. And that is a gap as wide as you want, as wide as the Free State, for any person who wants to use it to say you cannot, by virtue of being charged, be found to must step aside. So yes, I agree. I do not see Mr. Magashule being told to step aside this weekend. I do want to add, though, to what Theo said, that I wouldn't read too much into who makes the announcement. We know that there was a decision by the National Working Committee of the ANC that Mr. Magashule is no longer to make the announcements. These announcements on NEC meetings were always made by the Secretary General. But after Mr. Magashule told a few fibs, he was told not to do so. So I wouldn't be looking out for that. What I would be looking out for is a way, and this is what Theo referred to resolve this problem going forward, and these inexactitudes which must be addressed and which will be addressed when the ANC National General Council, which is expected anytime from February, or the National Conference of the ANC takes a decision on a stepping aside plan, and whether it be implemented. I do not believe it will be implemented now. So in that regard, I'm in full agreement with Theo.
Stephen Friedman from Joubert has joined us. And Stephen, hi, good afternoon. And listening to our two other panel members, the question that comes up is whether, after all the hype that we've seen in the media about this NEC meeting, whether it's actually going to turn out a bit of a damn squib.
Just to clarify, I can't respond to what you just have said because I wasn't online when they said it.
Mm-hmm.
But into your question, yes, I think that's true. I think that there is a tendency, quite frankly, to which one has become used to hyped up breathless coverage before NEC meetings, which then turns out to be a damn squib. And I think that's because very often, besides the obvious cliche point that people in the media like sensation, it's also the problem, I think, that, this whole thing operates with inspired leaks from one side or the other. And obviously the people who are doing the inspired leaking have a vested interest in trying to dramatize whatever it is they're doing and claiming that things are far more serious than they are. This is not a problem. The resolution in question was passed 5 years ago. It's attracting a certain amount of attention now because Magashule is involved and he's the Secretary General. But of course, it has been an issue for some time now in the provinces. And what happened is that these things get fudged. And I think that's generally the way things have operated in a divided ANC for quite a long time. I think it's the way they will continue to operate. And so I think those who are expecting some kind of dramatic development at this NEC meeting are unlikely to get what they're expecting.
The report carried a story today in the run-up to this NEC. I would like to look at it, even though I accept that what you guys have said, that we mustn't expect anything dramatic. But Report has been reporting on certain campaigns, if one could call it like that, within the party, drumming up support for the president on the one side, for others on the other side, for Ace Magashule, etc. And the strange names that came out today, well, the one strange name is David Mashlobo, who, according to them, has teamed up with Aaron Motsoaledi in a whole effort to drum up support and to strengthen the president's standing and so on. Is that a likely scenario to you, Stephen?
Yes, and remember...
Well, you see, sorry.
Stephen, carry on. Sorry.
Sorry, I thought somebody interrupted. Look, I wouldn't be surprised in the sense that, I think very often people tend to think also that the divisions which existed in 2017 are still the divisions which exist today. And the example which I think is most pertinent is you will remember the about turn on cigarettes during the lockdown when it was said that was Dlamini Zuma asserting her faction's control over Ramaphosa, etc. The fact of the matter, Edge, was that Dlamini Zuma has been an ally of Ramaphosa's for some time now. She happens to have hang-ups about cigarettes, but that had nothing to do with factional politics. All sorts of alignments are possible, but I think that, you have to be very, very careful. And I think that's, with respect to something which the media in South Africa is not careful about most of the time, to be aware of, people are leaking these things for a reason. They're campaigning. They're trying to get people for their point of view. And I'm obviously generalizing, but I think far too few political journalists bother to do what is the basics of the profession, which is to actually check out what you're told and evaluate whether it is something which is important or it's something which one or other faction is spinning in order to get political mileage. Of course, the other thing we've seen, besides these reports of Mashlobo and Motsoaledi, etc., it seems to have become the in thing at the moment to leak lists of candidates for 2020. And I think that this has to be taken with a huge pinch of salt, because most of these are kite-flying exercises. Most of these are putting things out there to see what sort of reaction you get. I think the chances that the slates for 2022 will look anything like what's circulating on social media at the moment is very unlikely. So I think the general message is, very often what you read, whether it's in Rapport or anywhere else, is coming from the politicians within the ANC, but you have to be aware that they're doing this for a reason, and that means that what they say has to be checked out.
You go along with that, Theo?
Yes, I think Stephen was very diplomatic about the leaking situation. Some journalists are actively playing along rather than doing their work in terms of leaking, but that was one of the predictions that I was venturing into when the whole Ace Magashule thing started. And as we moved along over the last 2 or 3 weeks, especially when Ace was in court, and that is the pushback, the primary platform for the pushback would be the Sunday press. It would be a lot of articles published and different views on things. And then I would like to add something to Mashlobo, and that is, if you dish out the blankets, which governments do, and you're not in government, but you've been relegated to a position of a portfolio chairman, you will actually do a lot. So I think Mashlobo is a good example where political pragmatism plays a much higher role than, for instance, political principle or anything of that nature. And a lot of that is showing. A lot of that is showing, and we will also see other games. For instance, I had a very strong rumor that my good friend here in the Northwest, Supra Mahema-Pelu, and Ace Magashule were actively involved in the ATM's motion of no confidence. Now, that again is either a rumor, or it is a part of a pushback, or it's the Ramaphosa guys wanting to add this onto their back. And we must be very careful about these things. My last comment would be on Yan Yan. Yan Yan, I've got severe problems with that 1.4 million membership. If you look at the ANC's growth, and if you look at the numbers and so on. So, but you covered yourself by saying, I hope it's well audited. So let's wait for the audit and see what's going on. I did some research. I know it's many, many moons ago on the IFP. And I got invited by the then Dr. Dlomo, Oscar Dlomo, very nice man in his time.
That is a long time.
Yeah.
He resigned in 1990.
And they claimed at that stage to have 700,000 members. So I said to him, Dr. Dlomo, I'm just a simple researcher. Can you show me how your database is working? So in Ulundi, they took me to a room. And I can still remember the official managing that room was a Mr. Buthelezi. No family of Gacha then, but when I opened the door, I saw boxes and boxes and boxes of membership cards. And I said, okay, is it organized? He said, no. As guys join, we just put it in a box. I said, what about the dead guys? No, they don't care about the dead guys. They only put new members. So that 700,000 then was completely hogwash. Now, I know the ANC system works a little bit better, but I'm still very cynical.
Yeah, look, I agree with you, Theo. That's why I went a bit further than saying audit. I talked about the fox and the hen house and the fact that we are speaking of Mr. Magashule. And as the only practicing journalist, I just want to take up the cudgels for the profession, much maligned as it might be, and say that we must always remember that the term media is a plural, and that from a liberal perspective at least, another much maligned and misused epithet, but the media consists of individuals. So it has always been so, and it will always be so, that the standard of reporting will be uneven. However, much good work is being done, and I can just say from the coalface that what makes it incredibly difficult to distinguish between fact, fiction, kites, and the like is the fact that one would have to presuppose some form of principle amongst ANC members, that the principle of truth weighs anything at all. In my estimation, no. As far as the IFP goes, an organization which I know very well, and Dr. Dlomo, this is a pre-1990 story. It's a long time ago. But that said, we have to remember, and Stephen, I think you've done some work on this, so you will agree with me. Not that I want to put words in your mouth, but we must always remember that KwaZulu, as it was, as Dr. Buthelezi calls it, the erstwhile homeland of KwaZulu, was a one-party state. And therefore, people were obliged to join the IFP if they were to work in the KwaZulu civil service. Absolutely. Otherwise, they would have to go on what we called in those days, and I grew up in Ulundi to some extent. It's my earliest childhood memories. I lived in Ulundi with my father in a caravan when I was about 3 years old. He built the Legislative Assembly. He's a builder. So point being that in those days, the 700,000 might well have been true. And in the end, they got a heck of a lot of, I don't know about votes, but ballots in 1994. But we have to remember it was a one-party state.
Well, I think let's step off this one for now, and we'll see what transpires at the meeting. I'm sure it's going to be quite interesting, but let's stick to politics, though, and the political war front, if one could call it that. And Nelson Mandela Bay at last got a new mayor this week after the previous one got sent to jail. And he was hardly sworn in, and the previous guy gets released from jail after only a couple of weeks. And that poor city's big fight still isn't over, Jan.
And what they do have now, to my mind, for the first time, perhaps since democratization, is a good man in the mayoral position. Ngababanga is a politician of rare quality. And that has put him in a position to actually have, for the DA in Port Elizabeth, Uitenhage dispatch area, which is Nelson Mandela Bay, what the DA does not have in Tshwane, which is a workable majority, and that is through sheer personability. That said, he has his work cut out. Port Elizabeth, Nelson Mandela Bay is now the COVID naughty chair, no longer the Western Cape. Thank you, Mr. Alan Winde, who I think has stood up for our province. But point being that he has inherited a situation in which he had no say. Those decisions are taken at a national and provincial level. And much as one could say that the Eastern Cape is as pathetic as always, not taking any responsibility and just telling the national government, hey, help us out here, at least they're no longer blaming us in the Western Cape for the ills, so to speak. But what I want to raise about this election, which happened on Friday in Port Elizabeth, is the disgraceful conduct of the ANC. Surely it is a new low point in anti-democratic conduct in South African democracy since '94. The ANC correctly criticizes the EFF for its behavior in Parliament. And talking of the EFF, interestingly, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, I've said that one should not call the EFF fascist. I hope that the DA listens. But that said, to actually send in people to abduct the speaker and to injure her to the extent that she is still in hospital, and that to stop a democratic vote, to me brings into massive question, if we are not questioning it at all, whether the ANC is a democratic organization at all, or whether it's simply a criminal group of thugs.
Are we leaderless now?
I think we've left. I think our anchor has left. So I think maybe you must speak, Theo.
Well, Jan, that was a very, very strong view. But I agree. Kobus is back. I agree that when I heard the story about the speaker, I just thought, what can go wrong? What can more go wrong in Nelson Mandela after they've been locked in with COVID and all the other things? But I hope for them that they get things sorted out, and next year, 2021, they will have elections again, and that we will all check very, very closely in terms of where is this thing going.
Anchor, we lost you, but we didn't lose our moorings. It's Stephen's chance now.
Sorry, what do you want me to respond to?
I think to what Theo said, I think Kobus is gone.
The situation, Kobus is gone.
Yeah, I don't
this
see
is
him.
getting a bit complicated. Okay.
Isn't it?
All right. So what? All right. Well, look. I mean, if I was asked to respond, look. I mean, obviously, I'm more interested in what events say about our politics and the bigger picture issues, if you like, than the question of what the party did to the other party. And I think the issue in Nelson Mandela Bay, incidentally, I think there's some confusion. And Lungisa, who went to jail, was never the mayor, as far as I recall.
Yeah, no, I don't think
be that as it may. No, he wasn't. No, he was never the mayor. He was a councillor.
No, he was never the mayor.
Yeah. No, the issue in Nelson Mandela Bay, which is takes on particular kind of shape in Nelson Mandela Bay, is that coalition politics in this country is maybe something which is coming over the hill, but it's something which the parties have no idea how to manage. Or some parties have an idea of how to manage it, and it's certainly not managed in a way which is vaguely in the public interest, because what tends to happen is that if one of the bigger parties needs some of the smaller parties to join them in a coalition, you have incredibly opportunistic coalitions. And that is regardless. I mean, I'm certainly not in the business of defending the ANC, but I do want to make the point that these issues, I mean, I'm not talking about abductions of speakers, but these issues are not exclusive to the ANC. So, for example, if you look at Johannesburg under Herman Mashaba, who is now sort of regarded as a sort of pinnacle of probity, etc. I mean, the reality, and this was reported, it didn't get any reaction. I mean, I'm not saying anything which was not reported in media. Essentially, what happened then is that coalition partners were able to take over tender committees, siphon tenders to their particular favored people. And obviously, the DA did nothing about it because they wanted the votes. and they wanted them to stay in the coalition. And what has happened in Nelson Mandela Bay is precisely this: that you have smaller parties who are demanding. They're certainly not demanding policy. Let's put, Theo said I was being diplomatic. Let me be diplomatic again and say that the demand is not about policy; they're about other things. And this creates a sort of politics, and it creates a kind of politics which, it's about who gets given what rather than what policies are adopted. It also creates. We also have this very interesting situation where, and I made this point to the local government association last week, where we had metros in the country and some other municipalities which were run by minority governments. And if you look at democratic systems, minority governments are an ideal opportunity for all sorts of deal making between parties and new alignments, etc. Because of course the governing party needs the vote of the smaller of the other parties. And you see none of this. I mean, the minority governments continue to govern and are treated as though they're majority governments. So the point I'm making very generally about Nelson Mandela Bay is that, in some respects, it's a step forward for South African politics. We have coalitions. On the other hand, I'm afraid that, if the coalitions are handled in the way they're being handled at the moment, they're unlikely to help citizens. They're far more likely to make life more difficult for citizens because they simply open opportunity for what in my profession is called rent seeking. But, there are other names for it.
Cobus, do we have you back?
I'm back. I had a complete computer failure here, so I want to thank you guys for carrying on while I was trying to switch computers here and get everything running in the studio with Mornay. And fortunately, Theo has been very experienced in this sort of thing with me over the years. So thank you. I think it sounds to me as though you've covered the Port Elizabeth aspect pretty well, so I think we can walk away from that. Another big story this week has been the matric exams, the maths paper that got leaked, and according to the Department of Basic Education, fewer than 200 entrants actually saw that leaked paper before they wrote. They put out a very accurate, I beg your pardon, a very specific number, I think 185 or 195 or whatever. But still, they now insist that every matric student, math student, must rewrite the exam. I found that rather astonishing. Theo?
Well, it's the same problem we had with COVID. What government has done on Thursday evening when the president spoke, and he said two things in my view. He said, Nelson Mandela Bay need to be locked down because that is a hot spot. But the Western Cape, especially the Southern Cape, he did not say so, but I think he gave a lot of credit to how the Western Cape provincial government managed the COVID thing. That's the right way to do things, is to focus on the areas that need it. And I think here we took the same COVID approach by asking all matriculants to rewrite, I think, on the 14th and the 16th of December or something like that, which is going to take the year almost up to Christmas. And traditionally, South Africa switched off at the end of November, and now we're operating in December. This is new territory for everybody. But yeah, I think it was way too heavy. If you could secure the schools or the places or whatever, let them rewrite, but don't hit everybody with a big hammer.
The thing is, Stephen, looking at this and the way these decisions get made, we know that the country's already suffered through a lot. One of the biggest hits was on tourism. And now at the end of the year, where there might have been a little bit of relief for that sector, among others, we get this sort of big hammer approach to solve the problem. And surely we should have learned by now that we need to be a bit more pinpointed, if one could call it that.
Well, it's very much a question of who we are, which I'll come back to in a moment. The first point I do want to make is that that decision will not necessarily be the final decision, because if you were following the news today, the teachers' unions are going to court to contest that decision. And of course, if it is an irrational decision, then it will be overturned. I just think that, and I'm certainly, I don't think it was a wise decision. I mean, if you've identified the 185 students, I just think that there's an interesting dynamic in this country which is worth talking about, and which I wrote about in relation to former President Mbeki some years ago. And that is that, I mean, we remain a racially divided society. And one of the aspects of remaining a racially divided society is that I think that people in government, or some people in government, are particularly sensitive about this kind of constant refrain that we're becoming a banana republic, that as soon as majority rule happens, it all goes down the drain, etc. And when you have something like exam leaks, which are obviously not a good idea, but certainly not the only country which has exam leaks, it creates these kind of images that, once again, the banana republic thing comes out, etc. And I think that there is a tendency in that situation to not think entirely, that's why I asked you who we were. And I don't have any proof of this, but I've seen it in other decisions. So I can imagine people saying in the meeting, look, we have to show them that we're serious about this, that, our exams are 100% uncompromised, and this is the way we're going to do it. So it's not a wise response, but it is a response which I think is to the kind of society we are, and that doesn't mean that it's necessarily anybody's fault. But I think we always have to be careful in these situations. It's become almost a sort of knee-jerk thing in public debate in this country to say, "Oh no, the government is being totally irrational. They're a bunch of mad people, etc." When very often there are reasons for this, and when one points out that there are reasons for this, one is not necessarily supporting the decision, and in this case I think it was the wrong decision, but I think we get far further in understanding our country if we understand why people are making these decisions, rather than simply assuming that it's some kind of maniac sitting in an office who doesn't know what they're doing.
Jan Joubert?
Yes, well, I cannot for the life of me see where that number of 185 comes from. I think it is exceedingly optimistic. How on God's earth did they get to that? Did pupils own up and say, "Oh, I got this. Yes, prosecute me. 185, really?" As far as Stephen's point goes, I think fair enough. I mean, the problem more and more globally, and there are many reasons for it, is that people tend to see their political opponents as either crazy or maniacs, if you want, or stupid. And if people are crazy or stupid, then there's no point in engaging with them. And that, of course, is easy, because then you only have to listen to yourself. That is very unintelligent and exceedingly unintellectual. So I agree with Stephen in that there will be reasons. There will be a court case, at least by SATU. I don't know about the other teachers' unions. And we will see what comes out of it. What I, for the life of me, do not believe is 185. The second thing is that I think it has once again shown the dangers of centralization in an incapable state. I'm not saying a maniacal state. I'm not meaning that. And I certainly, my whole family history goes against this, and my own, despite appearances, do not long for any time before 1994. It was an evil system, and the DET, for one, was not worth even being called an examination authority. But that said, it is inexcusable what has happened. And if it is not possible to handle the immensely, enormously, how shall I put it? It's a top-heavy system. If you can't handle it, then you must change it. And then perhaps it will be better to decentralize it so that at least if you have a problem in Tsenin, it does not mean that every child in Gansbaai must also rewrite the exam. But it is inexcusable what has happened. I am pretty sure that heads will not roll. And if government starts believing its own nonsense about 185 pupils, then quite frankly, I have very little hope that this will be correctly addressed.
Right. We've actually run out of time, but I need to talk about one more event this past week. Back to party politics. And the DA spokesperson for communications, Phumzile van Damme, got sent on leave ostensibly to recuperate from illness. And then Deputy Zak Mbile gets appointed shadow minister ahead of her. Jan, that's your area there as well, your province. What's happening there? Because Phumzile has been a target, if I can call it that, or she's certainly been a topic for some time now.
Yes, well, it's not only my province, it's my suburb. She literally lives about a kilometer from me, and I can personally testify to the fact that, yes, she is ill. She knows that. She has a neurological condition which is not improving. So it might be a good idea for her to take a sabbatical. It is important to remember that she was not replaced and not fired. She has been basically suspended for 3 months. She is an opponent of Mr. Steenhuisen, and if that is how he settles scores, well, that would be pathetic, and it would carry with it the death of the DA in such behavior. That said, and absolutely saying that it's wrong to send someone a letter about their own health, even if especially if you're not a medical doctor, it is important to say that it is the prerogative of the party leader, and that he made it clear in the letter to her, which I've seen, that that he says you must sort out your health and you must be back on the front line in 3 months. Final point, if this were a settling of political disputes, he certainly has a strange way of going about it, and then he's very inconsistent. Because the DA appointed last Friday, not 2 days ago, a week before that, its highest position unelected, and that is national spokesperson. It went to Siviwe Gwagube, who is not a supporter of Mr. Steenhuisen, who is a supporter of Mbali Ntuli. So I don't think this is a settling of scores.
Stephen Friedman?
Well, incidentally, and I don't usually go into personalities, Mr. Steenhuisen, from a personal experience I had, has a record of not making principled decisions, quite frankly. So the question of whether Mr. Steenhuisen is principled or not, I mean, he has a record. And I had a personal encounter with him in which that record was entirely confirmed, of doing what he thinks is expedient for him at any given time. And he's perfectly well aware of what incident I'm talking about. As far as the issue is concerned, I mean, the point is that there is a pattern here. I mean, I'm not rooting for Van Damme, and I don't know what her medical condition is. But the point is that every time there is an outspoken black person in the DA who is critical of the leadership, they somehow land up having a problem, and we know the litany, Maziboko, Maimani, etc., etc., etc. Mbali Ntuli is a very good example. I mean, this is somebody who I think is widely regarded as a very competent politician, who's a sort of middling member of the KwaZulu-Natal Legislative Assembly. So yes, her deputy is also black, and yes, they appoint the odd person from the other faction. But I think that they're a mess which go out to the DA, that you have to conform to what the leadership wants. And if you're a black person who does what the leadership wants you to do, then you are welcome. If you're a black person who doesn't, then you're not. And all I can say about, in terms of how much credibility, what I have to say is, when we see, first of all, just the other point I want to make, this is a very deep-rooted thing. We've yet to have a situation, and that's part of the problem in the DA, where a black person in the DA, who is an independent thinker, gets elected to a senior position. And by elected, I don't mean a situation a la Maimane or Mazibuko, where the leadership decide you're okay and they put you in that position. I'm talking about an open contested election in which you win. And that hasn't happened yet. And quite frankly, until that happens, the impression is going to be that in the DA, and that may well be the case for people who are not black as well, incidentally, that if you do what the hierarchy wants you to do, you're very welcome. And if you don't, you're not really welcome. And of course, the DA is entitled to do this. It's an organization which contests elections, and if you don't like what it does, then you don't have to vote for them. But it does seem to me that as long as they do this, they are going to be in a weak position. And it doesn't terribly much affect how many votes you get, but what it does affect, and I've been talking about this for quite a while, it does affect who is prepared to go into coalition with you. And if you have a reputation that outspoken black people are not going to rise to the top on merit in your party, then your coalition partners tend to be reduced to the kind of opportunistic parties I talked about earlier, coalition with you because they want to get hold of goodies rather than because they have a principal position to advocate. It just seems to me, there's an old saying, how many coincidences do you have to have until you accept there's a pattern? And every time this happens to a black leader in the DA, there is some perfectly good reason why it happens, but yet it always happens.
Theo Venter, I'm giving you the last 30 seconds, and then we must say goodbye.
Yeah, well, I agree with my two colleagues that this is all about the DA's integrity and their image, and I think they're not playing this thing correctly. And I see a little bit deeper than Mr. Steenhuisen. I think I also see Ms. Helen Zille behind the scenes operating, but that may be just me seeing that. Thank you, Kobus.
I want to thank my panel. That was Theo Venter, and also on the program today, Stephen Friedman of UJ, and from the Cape, Jan Joubert. And we'll be back next Sunday at 5 o'clock. And then we'll have a look back over the year. I mean, we're not going to be, unless something very dramatic happens this week, we'll be looking back over the year. It's been a dramatic year on its own in various ways. So join us next Sunday at 5 o'clock. And in the meantime, have a nice week. Bye-bye.